Well, hello there and good afternoon. It's Sunday, March 12th, 2017. Hope everybody's having a great weekend. And today we're going to share a little secret from the silver market. And again, in my opinion, I continue to believe is, well, after things develop, will be perhaps the greatest story, incident, situation in the history of the financial markets. Certainly everything I've ever read, studied, or talked to people about, I don't know that there's ever been a situation quite like this. And the short version is that over this past decade in particular, although it's been going on even longer than that, when you've seen the expansion of the money supply and so much printing and new dollars coming in, which is typically the environment where you would think gold and silver would rise. Yet, especially since about April of 2011 and a little later in the summer, the metals were higher again that year. But instead, we've seen gold and silver consistently get pounded in one of the more unusual and bizarre periods in financial markets where just when you see event X happening that would seemingly lead to outcome Y, then you get the opposite of that, which again back 7 years ago was when I'd always heard rumors of those markets being manipulated, and then eventually, if you start following it on an everyday basis and try and make sense out of what happens, it becomes a bit more and more obvious. Again, last year, the banks basically got caught not only confessing to manipulating the markets, but really bragging about it because they weren't too careful with their chat transcripts. And so that's the short story. Now, where that leads us is, well, how does this ultimately end? Andrew Maguire, who's a trader known within the silver community because he's spoken out about a lot of things he's seen and provided a lot of information, had an interview this past weekend that I'll link below the video today, explaining some of the dynamics. And I mean, one quick way of looking at it is that for every piece of silver, the numbers range from 92 paper claims to it. Then if you add in the paper derivative books, it's God only knows how many people think they own a piece of silver when, again, that's goes back to where you hear people talk about it being traded in paper. So there's been a big divergence between the actual physical supply and demand of silver, which myself and I would think most other silver experts would argue is the demand is significantly higher than where it's trading right now. Yet you see this continued low price that's basically around 15, 17 bucks, which is basically the cost to get a piece of metal out of the ground. So in the end, if you had a situation where everyone came in for their silver at the same time, then that's when you have what's known as a short squeeze, and where you hear people talking about substantially higher prices of silver, as high as the previous highs, which were around 50 bucks. Again, back in 2011, also 1980, when the Hunt brothers were buying a lot of silver. Another story found to be a bit different than commonly portrayed, so perhaps another day we'll talk about that. But now you hear, and I would argue that if the silver hit $49 back in 2011, and now we see direct transcripts for the bankers that the reason it didn't go higher was because it was intentionally smashed. And just to put that in perspective, I mean, we're not talking about gray area here. I mean, basically what they've acknowledged and been caught on record saying and colluding to are things that back when I was a specialist on the New York Stock Exchange, I imagine I would have been in jail the next day. So it's not like, maybe there's a misunderstanding. I mean, these are blatant market fraudulent activities. And everyone sits around saying, all right, it's great that it should be higher, but when does this actually change? And there's a few outcomes. Either A, the banks that are manipulating the markets could stop, and it's been interesting that one of the banks that's known to be the biggest manipulator, has acquired a massive silver position, we believe. So certainly they have an incentive to let prices go higher. Or you could just eventually reach the point where people come in asking for their metal and finally it's not there. So there's this paper price that can be manipulated, but at some point, if the demand in the physical markets is great enough, then it could overwhelm the paper markets, which is exactly what Andrew Maguire, who I mentioned before, talked about in this recent interview. And you've been hearing rumblings lately of perhaps that we might be nearing that point. Again, we've been hearing rumblings for a while, and it's one of those situations where it's almost what else could happen what other signs could there be until it actually happens? Who knows? But something to keep an eye on, and I think you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the near future, so figured we'd tell you before it happens. So to the degree that you're interested in understanding the silver market, tricky thing to trade, although if you understand the risks correctly and position yourself in the right way, I think it is the opportunity of a galactic lifetime. And now, of course, the timing is tricky, so it can be easier said than done capturing it, but certainly worth being aware of. And again, if you're really interested in silver, I would recommend that Andrew Maguire interview that I will link below, because whether it's in the next week, month, or 5 years, I continue to believe we're going to see some stunning things that you would have never imagined. So anyway, it should be an exciting week of trading. I wish you a blessed week and that everything is peaceful in your life and going well. And hopefully this helps, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.